in me were confidence, drive and determination to get involved in anything I'm truly passionate about.
Simply put, Patchwork has been family, diversity, new opportunities and personal growth.
It's a champion for underrepresented communities, and it's a champion for young people.
Being accepted unconditionally, regardless of your background, is part of what makes Patchwork truly special. A support network that have always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself.
It is a truly great organisation in helping younger people, students, graduates, often from minority backgrounds, to get into the professions.
Whether it's the prestigious MP of the Year Awards, the hugely successful masterclass programmes, or the question and answer sessions with leading politicians and civil servants, there's no denying that the Patchwork Foundation has made its mark at the very top of British politics.
Patchwork's important because it raises the awareness of politics amongst young people.
This is a truly extraordinary programme for these young people.
It is vital that young people from all backgrounds have influence in the political world.
Patchwork has allowed me to meet with key political figures who otherwise I would not be able to meet or engage with.
I've been to Parliament, number 10, spoken to special advisors.
I was able to go to the Lib Dem conference and see what kind of decisions are made in these big conferences.
I've done telephone banking and campaigned, and these are things I never thought I would ever do.
Patchwork helped me to come out of my comfort zone.
It has honestly been one of the best decisions that I've made in my life.
Thank you for that, Tess. It's a really good video. I think kind of summarizes to Luisa who we are and what we do. And hi everyone, and thank you for joining the session today, especially Councillor Luisa for your time. And also thank you to our sponsor for this event, which is Letter One. So Luisa is the Liberal Democrat candidate for the London Mayoral elections. And I'm just going to kind of give us a rough outline of what our format for today will be. So I'm just going to start quickly by giving some initial remarks on Luisa's background and experience and career and how she's got to the stage she's gotten to, before kind of giving the floor to Luisa for 10 minutes to give us some opening remarks on her reflections and her kind of campaign so far. Following this, I'll then go into questions for myself in 10 to 15 minutes, and any questions are on Zoom. If you raise your hand, virtually, of course, I will go to those. And then I think we'll also follow up with of course, some more focused audience questions and really getting into to answering questions that matter to young people. Finally, I'll give Luisa some time to give us some closing statements and thoughts and a few words from myself just to top it off, and really thank you for being here with us today, Luisa. So who is Luisa, who's sitting before us? So Councillor Luisa is the Liberal Democrats candidate for the London Mayoral election. She grew up in Camden, so is London through and through, and graduated with a degree in history and then a master's in Paris before starting a career during possibly the hardest years to start your career, which is 2008, when we had the largest financial recession in recent memory. Prior to politics, Luisa's kind of held many different hats and different kind of roles and career paths. She's worked as a journalist for a period, consultant within the strategic advisory firm Global Counsel, a political researcher, an advisor, and a communications director, to name but a few. Since then, Luisa has kind of stepped into the political realm and has been a councillor in Camden since 2018, which is of course her home kind of town, and the leader of the Liberal Democrats group within that council. Additionally, in 2019, she was elected as a member of the European Parliament, and a position that she held till early 2020. And since then, of course, Luisa is standing before us as the London mayoral candidate. So Luisa, I just wanted to give you, 10 minutes to give us a background of yourself and your campaign. And also I just wanted to open with a kind of question of what does London really mean to you? So what are its strengths, its weaknesses, and how has London shaped the person that we see in front of us today?
Well, thank you, Naeem, for that very kind introduction. And thank you to all the young people who are here right now and for that amazing video introduction. I'm already inspired having watched that. I think one of the things that makes London so great is our young people, actually. We're a very young and vibrant city, and it's young people that make London what it is. our city would not be the same without that youthful energy that drives so much innovation and diversity in our city. So that's something I would definitely want to capitalise on as mayor. But some of the weaknesses that I see are actually areas where young people in particular are being let down, which is why I will talk about this in a little bit more detail in a moment. But I've chosen to focus on jobs, homes and clean air as my 3 top priorities, because I think these are urgent issues for young people and their futures. We know that youth unemployment is rising fastest as a result of the pandemic. We know that there isn't enough affordable housing for young people to come and live in London and for young people to establish their lives here. And clean air, well, that is a social justice issue that affects the next generation more than anyone else. So that's why it'd be a top priority for me as well. So I guess I'll use that as a jumping off point to say a little bit more about my campaign. It's been an incredibly tough year for Londoners, but especially young people. And I've found that too often the government has forgotten about young people and let them down. Whether it's the loss of education, the A-levels fiasco, having to pay for university accommodation that you're not using, not being given enough work opportunities, or being treated like infection spreaders when many young people are vulnerable to the virus as well. It's been hard enough for young people to be apart from friends and family over the last year. And I think what we really can't risk now is leaving a generation of young people behind. So I've got a plan for our recovery, and I'm putting young people at the heart of it. We've seen some unprecedented changes to the way that we live and work over the last year, and those are here to stay. The rise of online shopping, the shift towards home working, what would have been 10 years of steady change has been accelerated because of the pandemic. So I think we've got a choice in front of us. We can try to reverse these big changes, or we can embrace them and adapt to them, have a plan for it and make it work for all Londoners. And I don't think that people are going to give up the convenience of online shopping or the flexibility of working some days from home. And I haven't heard any other candidate or party talking about these changes, let alone planning for them. From Boris Johnson to Sadiq Khan, I think that our current crop of politicians are burying their heads in the sand a bit about the changes that are going on. They're pretending that London will just go back to the way that it was. And so we need a leader now for the future of London who understands the way that our city's changing and is ready to make sure that it's an attractive and affordable place for young people to live and work. So I mentioned it at the beginning, my plan focuses on the 3 basic needs of Londoners: jobs, homes and clean air. So I'll quickly talk you through those. First of all, let's start with jobs. I graduated during the last recession, Naim mentioned that at the beginning there. And so I know how tough it can be with short-term contracts and employers always wanting more experience before actually giving you a chance. I'm determined that London's recovery from the pandemic doesn't see a lost generation. And so that's why I'd introduce a London apprenticeships hub. This will be a resource for young people to find opportunities more easily and to encourage businesses to create more apprenticeships, because currently only 8% of London's businesses actually employ an apprentice. This could and should be so much higher in every sector, not just in traditional trades. And so that's why I'd bring young people and employers together to nurture talent and create the workforce of the future. I also think we need to take advantage of people spending more time in their local areas so we can make our high streets thriving places at the heart of our communities once again. And with more people working from home, we'll need more shared working spaces, childcare services, and places to eat and drink after work in every neighbourhood in London. So as Mayor, I'd establish a Reinvent the High Street task force to take charge of making these transformations a reality all over the city, working with local councils to deliver that. But if we want London to be an attractive place to work, then we have to make it an affordable place to live as well. So my next priority is homes. I know about living in overpriced, poor quality, private rented accommodation. It simply isn't good enough that this has become the accepted way to spend your 20s in London. And the current mayor has let us down on this. He's completely failed to deliver enough affordable homes. He's not started even half of his own 2016 target. So that's why I would create a London housing company, a City Hall-backed developer, to take charge of delivering the affordable homes that Londoners need. And this would do things like converting some of the empty office space coming onto the market as a result of the shift to home working into quality, affordable homes. This is something that's already been done in Rotterdam, so we can do it here too. And I think we shouldn't miss this once in a generational opportunity to finally fix our housing crisis and make sure our city is accessible for everybody. My third priority is clean air. I'm an asthmatic because of the pollution in London, and we can't consign the next generation to a worse fate. We already know that our toxic air led to the death of 9-year-old Ella Kissy Deborah, and we owe it to her memory to tackle poor air quality as an urgent social justice issue. There's a lot that the Mayor's office can do to help tackle the climate crisis. That means backing the future of travel and ditching our polluting past. The current Mayor is motoring ahead with a new £2 billion motorway, the Silvertown Tunnel, which would only make our poor air quality worse. If you haven't heard of it before, it's an expensive, polluting new road project that will drive a hole through our zero carbon ambitions and take funds away from the public transport projects that we need. So I'll scrap the Silvertown Tunnel and I'll invest in making it easier to walk and cycle around all our capital's neighbourhoods, as well as clean, green public transport projects. The Liberal Democrats have also fought hard to keep free travel for under 18-year-olds and will make all of London's buses zero emissions, prioritising the red routes where children from ethnic minority communities are being worst affected. I'm also excited by something that they've done in Chicago, making every roof in the city green. So adding more plants and vegetation and solar panels on the roofs of commercial and residential buildings. And I want us to do that here to help to rewild London and clean up our air. I also know that crime is a real fear for many young people, and we urgently need to build trust between the police and the communities that they serve. Unfortunately, the failures of successive mayors to deliver enough opportunities for young people also mean that too many young Londoners suffer from the impact of violent crime. So as mayor, I will tackle youth violence by creating a London Youth Service that will deliver a joined-up approach to youth services across our capital. So by providing every young Londoner with a positive activity to be doing after school, we'll reduce the numbers of young people drawn into violent crime and make our city safer for all of them. Just before I wrap up, I'd also like to say something about our relationship with the rest of Europe. I joined the Liberal Democrats because of Brexit just after the 2016 EU referendum. It was an issue personal for me because I had lived, worked and studied in France during my 20s, and I didn't want other young people to be robbed of the opportunities that I had. So I've pretty much spent the last 4.5 years fighting to keep us in the European Union. Sadly, we know how that turned out, but the Liberal Democrats are still the most pro-European party in Britain, the most internationalist party, and we will always fight for the closest possible relationship with the EU and the principle of free movement. And I do believe that one day a young leader will take us back into the EU, and I'll be standing right there with you when it happens. So that's just been a snippet of my plan to take London forward, and you can read my manifesto on my website if you'd like to know more, but I'm looking forward to hearing all of your questions.
Thank you, Luisa, for that introduction. It really was quite interesting. And I think you touched upon quite a few really key issues on London and your your vision for London. The question I really wanted to ask you and start off with is if I could give you, a magic wand of policy, and I could ask you to really hone in on one issue in London that you think it not necessarily eclipses, but it to you is more important than the others, and it's a personal choice to you. Which would that be, and how would you try and tackle that within your first term as London Mayor?
Well, it's always hard to choose one, but I will do that. I think that possibly the most urgent issue is housing, because this is a crisis that's been going on for far too long, frankly. And I don't just feel strongly about it because of my own experiences of living in overpriced rented flats, but actually also because of what I've seen as a local councillor, dealing with so many individuals and families living in overcrowded temporary accommodation, not being able to access the decent homes that they deserve. And I think that having a decent roof over your head is a fundamental human right. So that's something that I think we should be tackling urgently. Frankly, this crisis has just gone on for too long, and we do have an opportunity to address it now. I think a lot of the young people that I speak to, I'd be interested to hear thoughts from others, tell me that they've kind of given up on the idea that living in London can ever be affordable. But the reason why it isn't is that we haven't increased the supply of housing. And I think we really can fix that now by embracing this opportunity to convert some of the empty office space coming onto the market into quality, affordable housing. And also having that city hall backed developer that's not for profit to actually take charge of this process, so we don't have to rely on dodgy deals with developers who often renege on their affordability commitments.
Just kind of following on from my question, I think it's really interesting, the idea of taking the old office spaces and converting them into housing. Really, I think the question I had around that is, London traditionally has a very strong kind of base of regulations and kind of laws around planning and kind of adjusting that. So how does that, and sometimes those laws are quite national, how does that kind of play into your idea of taking the office spaces and turning them into residential housing?
Well, I think this is why it's crucial to create that city hall backed developer to lead that process. And actually the first task that I would have for the London Housing Company is to scope out the size of the opportunity as a result of empty office space coming onto the market, because at the moment we don't even know how much empty office space there's going to be. So Paris, for example, has done an assessment of that, and the percentage of empty office space that is likely to come onto the market in the coming months or year. So we need to do that first of all. And actually that means not only will there be a new player, a new developer in London's housing market to lead the way and set conditions about the approach, but also it's gets over that problem of feasibility. So when working with the private sector, they already know what that opportunity is. Having said that, I won't be letting them lead this process, because we know that what has happened as a result of that. And so one of the things that the London Housing Company might do is, for example, buy up some of that empty space and maybe sell it back on, but with strong conditions that affordable housing actually has to be delivered. What we haven't seen enough of is social homes for rent, as lots of people will know already. So that's what this would do. And I would lobby the government for the powers to lead this process. It's been done in Rotterdam, so there's no reason why we can't do it in London.
Yeah. I think just for final question, kind of on the housing before we move on to other topic areas, what form of kind of policy or proposals do you suggest to actually really make sure it is affordable? So a model that's been used in Berlin previously is of course the rent controls. So what sort of policy would you suggest to really ensure that the rental accommodation of these office spaces that would be in a really prime location in central London, how are you going to kind of make sure it truly is affordable for the common Londoner?
Well, that's why we've got to increase the supply of housing, because that will bring down the cost of housing overall in London. I'm personally not a fan of rent controls. I think they're a short-term fix to a much bigger problem. It means that the generation that they're introduced for can benefit from it, but then the next generation is still stuck with the same problem, that housing supply has not been increased. So there's no substitute for doing that. And that's why I think it's crucial that we have to think creatively about the empty spaces that we already have in the capital, because we know there's not exactly an unlimited amount of land to build on, but we've got this empty office space. We've got more than 25,000 empty homes across the capital. I want to work with councils to bring those back into use. There's public land owned by TfL and the NHS. We can make use of that as well. But it's always a bit of a debate, isn't it? What constitutes affordable? Social homes for rent, that's what I want to deliver more of, because that's what we've not seen enough of. You know, shared ownership, for example, is only going to help people trying to get onto the housing ladder, but that's a pipe dream for most young people. They just need an affordable rent.
Yeah, I think that kind of touched upon one of the questions we've had in the chat, that some of these kind of, the proposal is really some of those offices would become social housing, if I'm correct, and reading into that correctly. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for your response on housing. I think, Luisa, that kind of covers the housing aspect, and I really want to get some of your other ideas out there as well. A question I had, which is completely left field to this, is you touched a bit upon, the clean air and how that plays into part with our travel kind of options and how people travel within London. One of the less talked about issues, and I'm not sure if you've had this question before, is in a lot of tube stations in London, I think it's only 81 out of 270 tube stations in London have disability access, so step-free access. And we've had quite a few delegates on the Patchwork program that have disability issues, that have struggled to get to some sessions because they have no step-free stations nearby. So what kind of policy or plan do you have to make London and transport more accessible for all, whether that be disability or maternity, etc.?
Well, this is a really key issue. We have to make sure that our public transport system is accessible for everybody. And I'm really proud, actually, that my colleague Caroline Pidgeon, our Liberal Democrat member on the London Assembly, has led on this issue, campaigning for more step-free access. And I've got both of these issues that you've raised in my manifesto. I'll make at least 15 more stations step-free and ensure that every station has tactile paving. Caroline has done a lot of work as chair of the Transport Committee to identify what stations need to be prioritised. And so I would work with her to deliver those changes, because it's been left like this for too long, frankly, and it's unjust.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, a great response, Luisa. I appreciate it. I kind of also taking a bit more left field to kind of get a broad perspective of your ideas for London. One of the key issues in London, and not just in London, across the whole UK in recent times, has been kind of the minority communities and of course Black Lives Matter and kind of diversity issue. So what would you do to ensure the minority faith communities such as the Jewish, Muslim and other communities feel safe in London? I think that's one part of the question. And the second part is in light of the Black Lives Matter protests and police brutality in America, and also some at home, what would you do to bridge that gap between communities and police? Because I think there's almost a them versus us culture. So I think there's two parts to this question. What would you do to ensure minority faith communities feel safer? And the second part is what would you do to bridge the gap between minority communities and the police force within London?
Well, thanks for bringing this up. I think that London has to become an anti-racist city. I've put that commitment in my manifesto. That's my vision for London. So I think that has to be our ambition, first of all. There are obviously practical things that we can do. There are incredible faith groups in our capital already that do a lot of work to make sure that different faith communities and ethnic minority communities are protected. And I would work closely with them to deliver the changes that they need to see to make sure that our city is safe. Tell Mama is a great organisation for the Muslim community. CST for the Jewish community keeps buildings safe. So I think working with those existing organisations is really important. That's something kind of critical to the mayor's powers, actually, is being able to bring people together and work with different groups in order to make our city safe. But also things like making sure that it's easy to report and record hate crimes. I think that often that process is seen as quite cumbersome for minorities. And we have to make that easier for people so that we're capturing this, but also obviously we want to be tackling that hatred and discrimination at source as well. So I think celebrating London's diverse communities is a big part of the solution too. It's great that we are really a very inclusive city, and Londoners tend to have an inclusive outlook, but we know that discrimination exists for all minorities and we need to take action to tackle that, which brings me on to policing. So we know that under stop and search powers, particularly suspicionless stop and search, it is disproportionately Black, Asian and other ethnic minority Londoners who get stopped. And this has fostered a lot of mistrust between the police and the communities they're supposed to be there to serve. I think with the Black Lives Matter protests last year, we saw, rightly, some of that frustration and anger coming to the surface, because for too many communities in London and across the UK, in fact, people's lives are being over-policed. So I would scrap suspicionless stop and search powers. I think that they aren't particularly helpful to policing anyway, because they're often reactive once an incident has already taken place. And it means that innocent Londoners are getting stopped. And it's one of the ways that we see that manifestation of institutional racism in our society. I also think that, I talked about embracing diversity more. I think we also need to improve it within the Metropolitan Police. Recruitment of Black, Asian and other ethnic minority Londoners into the Metropolitan Police has been too slow and is still too low. And unless the Met reflect the communities that they're there to serve, we're not going to solve this problem either. So I would push to make that happen.
Thank you very much, Luisa, for that response. I think that covers the bulk of the questions I had, and I really wanted to kind of open the floor up to anyone to raise their hands virtually on Zoom, or put it in the chat as Zain has just done, and ask your questions. So the first question, while people kind of raise their hands and think about their questions, is from Zain, who's asked, as mayor, how would you challenge the rhetoric from other politicians that kind of challenge different communities and put that kind of communities, marginalized communities a bit. I think Boris Johnson has in the past been in the press saying some remarks. So how would you challenge that rhetoric from other politicians?
Well, I will not be afraid to call out any discrimination or divisive rhetoric and tactics, frankly, by other politicians. I think we've seen far too much of that in recent years. I don't like bringing everything back to Brexit, but actually there has been a correlation between that kind of very febrile division and more hate crimes against minority communities in our country, and including here in London. And politicians have not helped with the things that they have said to sow division in our society. Boris Johnson is just one of them, but he's Prime Minister of this country, and he has a responsibility to show leadership for everybody. But we've been let down many times by him. So I won't be afraid to call him out. I've done it before when the government published their disgraceful report into whether institutional racism exists in this country. I think it's appalling that they denied the lived experiences of so many people by doing that. So I called that out at the time when it was published. And I will not hesitate to call out any remarks that sow division or increase intolerance and discrimination from other politicians.
Thanks, Louisa. I think that's a great message. There's also a question from Safia, who I'm guessing will put a video on and talk us through her question.
Hi, Louisa. So my question for you is, COVID has exposed how much loneliness and mental health issues there are across the country, especially in London. How will you tackle loneliness, and also especially when it comes to young people accessing mental health services?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Safia. This is really important. We know that young people are increasingly being affected with mental health struggles, and it's not surprising because there's a lot to be anxious about, quite frankly. So we need to make sure that young people are getting the support that they need. I've got a section in my manifesto about improving well-being and having targets for that. And actually, as a party, the Liberal Democrats have always led on treating mental health with parity in the same way as physical health is nationally by the NHS. And I'll use the office of the Mayor of London to lobby for that. But also, I think there are other things we can do, like working with local councils to ensure that every school has a counsellor in it. This is something that's being rolled out in Liberal Democrat-run Sutton. So that support is available directly for young people. But also, I think we need to alleviate some of the underlying reasons why young people are having more mental health struggles in the first place. A lot of it comes from insecurity and uncertainty. So I think making sure there are opportunities for young people, as well as support when they do have experienced difficulties, it is key. We've got to tackle the root causes of this. So that's why I'd set up the London Youth Service and London Apprenticeships Hub, to make sure young people have those opportunities to have a bright future.
Thank you for that, Louisa. Whilst others put their hands up and think about the questions, I had another one. I think you spoke a bit earlier about clean air and why that's important to you as an asthmatic. What is your vision for clean air? How will you try and reduce it, and how also will you try and ensure our energy mix is also kind of supporting that? Because of course a huge factor of emissions is our own energy mix and our own pollutant gases in London. So how will you kind of work with the government to shift that balance within London?
Yeah, well, I think that we need to tackle two key areas, housing and transport. These are two of the biggest contributors to climate change and sources of emissions. And as a capital city, we have plenty of both. So we have a big role to play in tackling the global climate emergency. There's a lot that can be done with the office of the mayor, transport in particular. I've mentioned I would scrap the Silvertown tunnel because that'll only add more cars to our road and increase toxic air pollution. It's the wrong direction to be going in if we're serious about cleaning up our air. I would also introduce a system of fairer pay-as-you-go road pricing, getting rid of this complex web of flat rate schemes that often disproportionately impact Londoners based on where they live or happen to work. But it will also raise more revenue overall to put TfL's finances on a more sustainable footing. And I think it's crucial that the next mayor has a plan for that, because we need to be supporting our public transport system and have those revenues to invest in more public transport projects, because at the moment a number of them are on ice, things like the extension of the Bakerloo line, Crossrail 2, the Rotherhithe walking and cycling bridge. So those are the few of the things that I do in transport. I've also mentioned, I think at the beginning, electrifying our bus fleet. Currently only 4% of London's buses are electric, and the current mayor's target is to reach all of the fleet in 16 years' time. That's not soon enough. So I've set a target of 2028, and I would work to deliver that. In housing, I think that we need a big retrofitting programme, and this is something that the Liberal Democrats are pushing for nationally. I'm proud that we're a very pro-environment party. We often lead on these issues, and our leader, Ed Davey, was Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change. So he's really putting this at the heart of our national campaigns as well. So I would link up with that to make sure that we have the retrofitting programs for homes that we need, because that's going to be a big part of the solution too.
Great, thank you, Luisa. I think we have another question from the audience from Tess, so we'll go there next.
Hi Luisa, thanks so much for joining us this evening. My question's a bit more reflective. I was just wondering, as a relative newcomer to the London Mayoral race, how you found the process and how you found your footing, and especially during the coronavirus.
Oh, thank you for that. Great question. Well, to be honest with you, it's been really surreal, because not long after I was selected, we went into ever tougher restrictions. So we've spent a large part of what would have been the campaign in lockdown. So I've spent a huge amount of time actually on my screen on Zoom doing things like this, chatting to you, which is obviously a great way of reaching Londoners as a substitute to face-to-face when you can't do that. But I don't think there's any real substitute for that face-to-face contact, and I've missed that a lot. So it's been really great actually in recent weeks being able to get out and about a bit again as restrictions have eased, and talk to Londoners on the doorstep. I'm a relative newcomer to politics as well. I only joined the party in 2016, but what I really like doing is ground campaigning and hearing what people are concerned about and the changes they want to see for the future. So it's been a little bit difficult being kind of disconnected from that for a long time, and it's been nice to get out there and hear feedback about our campaign and what Londoners are worried about, what they're hopeful for. So yeah, it feels like a real campaign now, but it felt very surreal for a while.
Great. We have another question also from Tom. You're gonna go next.
Hello there. Hello. Hi, Luisa.
Hello.
I've also grown up in London all my life. I've lived in Walthamstow, born and raised. And I've got kind of a question that I suppose hasn't really been spoken about, but I was just wondering, what would be your policies in terms of ensuring like community centres and libraries? Because obviously through these past couple of years, they've just shut down, like even all my local ones that I used to go as a kid and go after school and stuff like that have shut down to be replaced with housing. I was just wondering, do you have any initiatives in thought? Because obviously you've got everything you've been saying has been really good in terms of like your stuff to do with offices and the greener London, but in terms of like the community centres and libraries and even pubs, have you got any initiatives in order to probably help save them or even introduce them back into, I suppose, more use, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, really good question, Tom. Well, that's why I think we need a plan for our high streets and their future, because we can't just leave areas to languish. I think we do often see a lot of negative headlines about places closing down all the time, and it feels almost like this situation of irreversible decline, but it doesn't have to be that way. Actually, I think we've got an opportunity in front of us with people spending more time and money in their local areas to breathe new life into our high streets, providing more of the services that local communities want and need. And I think some of those services should be community organisations, libraries. I live around the corner from my local library, and they do an amazing range of things. They are a real hub for the local community. They don't just lend out books. They are community run. They provide yoga classes, open mic nights. There's a children's library and place for young people to gather and interact. And it's also an rare intergenerational space, isn't it, where young and old can come together. And I think that's so valuable. I think we've all kind of felt that difficulty of being apart in the last year. So we need to protect these vital spaces. And I think part of the way we do that is breathing new life into high streets, so that people are coming into the area and using those services. And there are things we can do to promote that. So I would set up a task force to reinvent our high streets. Sutton Council, run by the Lib Dems, actually won money from the government recently to deliver this kind of transformation, making sure there's more things like shared working spaces with people working from home, more childcare services available locally, and places to eat and drink after work as well, because I think that social contact is so important. Again, something we've all really missed out on in the last year and are just craving now and happy to have again. You mentioned pubs. Well, as it happens, I did the Bermondsey Beer Mile yesterday and was going around visiting pubs and small breweries in the area. And it's quite interesting. They've had a really tough time, breweries in particular. There's more than 100 of them in London, but they haven't necessarily got the financial support from government that they needed to get through the pandemic. They've kind of slipped through the cracks, like a few businesses and organisations have. So one of the things that I'm doing and the Lib Dems are doing nationally is lobbying for proper compensation and support to get them through this tough period. And I think that's what we need in all these cases, you know, whether it's community run organisations or small businesses. There are a lot of them that are struggling through no fault of their own because they've been forced to close and done the right thing. And they need more support from the government. But there's things that I would do as mayor to make sure that we're taking advantage of fresh local demand in areas and making our high streets thriving places at the heart of our communities again.
I think that's a great question, Tom, and I'm just going to piggyback off that quickly, Luisa. So I think, you know, often youth crime has been talked about a lot, and the rate of, you know, stabbings and violence in London. And I often think that sometimes prevention is better than cure, and perhaps having opportunities for these young people that are likely to get into crime and having those youth clubs reopened is a key issue in London. So what are your thoughts around youth clubs creating more opportunities for, like I say, young people, and identifying the ones that are vulnerable and likely to go down the wrong path, and bringing them back in and making them feel integrated and part of the community so that they can work towards a career and the future, really?
Well, you're absolutely right, Naim, that prevention is key. And so it frustrates me when you often hear politicians just talking about adding more police to our streets. We know that that's very reactive, and it's not tackling the root causes of why youth violence is happening in the first place. And that's things like poverty and lack of hope and opportunity for young people. So we have to be creating that, which is why I would create a London Youth Service to make sure that the youth services that are available are more joined up. That's one of the problems at the moment, and I'd work with local councils to make sure that that happens. Also, the London Apprenticeships Hub to make sure that young people have the opportunities to kickstart their careers. Only 8% of London's businesses are currently employing an apprentice, and I think there's a huge amount of untapped potential there. So we need to make sure that there are alternatives for young people to a life of crime, and make it harder for criminal gangs to prey on them and bring them into that dangerous situation, which is why I completely agree with you. We've got to focus on prevention and invest in our young people.
Yep, completely agree on the investment side. And Anna has asked a really great question, because I think in past earlier in the conversation we spoke about a bit about the kind of Black Lives Matter movement and also the violence around the Muslim and the Jewish communities. But Anna has asked a great question. Many women do not feel safe in London, and how and what can we do to change this and work with police and community organizations to really combat the key issue of gender-based violence?
Well, Anna, I can relate. There's not a single woman in London, and particularly young women, who haven't experienced a situation, and more than once, let's face it, it's an almost everyday experience where we have to make these daily calculations in order to keep ourselves safe. And that's not right. I see this in a bit of a similar way to the discussion we were just having about youth violence, that we need to focus on the root causes. So again, it angers me when I hear lazy solutions like, let's just have more police on the streets to protect women. That's not what we want. We want the freedom to live the same way that men can in our society. So what we have to be doing is rooting out misogyny. And I think recognizing that is a key starting point. We know that that's what led to the tragic death of Sarah Everard. And I think that's the thing that's at the forefront of so many of our minds still at the moment. And I think it's prompted a really important national conversation about what we can do to tackle violence against women and girls. And I'm really keen that this isn't just another conversation that we have like we did with Me Too, and then we just move on from it and nothing's really addressed. So one of the practical things that I would do as mayor is introduce a women's board made up of survivors and women's campaigning groups and organisations like Reclaim These Streets, which tried to organise the official vigil for Sarah Everard, and then we know what happened with the police there. To hold the mayor to account on their strategy to end violence against women and girls. So to make sure that that strategy is progressing as it should, because we know we haven't seen enough change, and also to influence policy and update that strategy as necessary.
I hope that answers your question, Anna, and she has. Thank you for that. I think we have a question from Yasmin, if she wants to unmute and go through it.
Sure, thank you, Naeem. Hi, Luisa. Thanks so much for coming to speak to us this evening.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I'm a Patchwork Masterclass participant this year. I was really interested to read about your plans for a universal basic income for Londoners. My question is, how would you be able to gain government support for this scheme? There's a lot of critique when Andrew Yang was suggesting a similar thing in the US, and I'm wondering if you've been facing the same kind of pushback here when you're speaking to the electorate.
Very good question. I think you're right that the government would probably take some convincing, but we need some advocates as a starting point if we want to bring that kind of big change that we need about. And there have been trials of universal basic income in other countries and other cities, and they've been successful, actually. So I think London, as a pioneering, forward-thinking city, should be the first place in the UK to trial that approach, which is what I'll be putting London forward for, and trying to make the case to government to do that. You're right that they may require some convincing, but actually I think the more voices calling for this kind of change, the more likely we are to get there. And we need a response to some of the structural changes that are happening in our economy, things like the rise of automation. Also, there are too many people who are doing unrecognised work as carers, for example. Who knows what more, especially younger people actually, could be doing if they had that security of a decent income in order to pay the bills every month. The kinds of career paths they could be exploring, more creative avenues, for example. So I think what we need is leading voices to try and bring this about. And the platform of the Mayor of London is a very influential one. So that would be my starting point.
I think that's really good points around kind of why a universal income is possible. Just looking on the flip side of that, there's in the lockdowns and in over the last year of going through the pandemic, there's been a spike in the amount of entrepreneurs, both within London and across the whole UK. And I think it's quite inspiring. I think we all can talk stories of some of our friends that have launched businesses during this period. So I was just wondering, what would you do to support young entrepreneurs in London and really give them the platform for them to take their idea to the global stage and make London really known as an entrepreneurship hub across the globe, like almost like San Fran is in America?
Yeah, I've got friends who've done similar things actually, and I find it absolutely amazing that there are people that found the headspace in the middle of a pandemic to actually set up a business as well. Most of us were just trying to get through it, weren't we? But one of my closest friends, actually, who I studied with in Paris and lives in London now, she set up a kind of urban greening business, encouraging people to plant more in their own gardens and spaces that they have access to, selling seeds. And it's just flown, this business, because loads of people became gardeners during lockdown, including younger people who maybe don't always have the best green fingers. I'm speaking from personal experience here. So I think there is a lot of potential out there, clearly, and we need to be encouraging that kind of creativity and innovation as much as possible. And actually, I think my plan to stimulate shared working spaces across all of our neighbourhoods in London would create the kind of environments to help foster startups, at affordable costs, giving them some office space, the opportunity to interact with other entrepreneurs and share ideas, because we know how important those spaces are for budding entrepreneurs to test their ideas and share them. I visited a couple of places like this recently in Homerton, in Richmond. They are cropping up already, but I think there's really space for a mayor who recognises that that's happening and is willing to be supportive of that change. So I think my approach to reviving our high streets would help with that, and create the spaces for that knowledge sharing that we know is key. But also, the Liberal Democrats have been lobbying for greater support for the self-employed and for small businesses throughout the pandemic. And that's what we need. We need proper support from the government for people who are trying to set up and run their own businesses. Because while there have been people that have established them in the last year, conversely, there have been a lot of people who were self-employed that have found it really difficult and are now thinking about not doing it anymore because they've just not been paid for the last year.
Sure. Thank you for that, Louisa. I think we're approaching the end of the time, and you've been very generous with it today. So I just wanted to before I kind of give some closing remarks on my reflections of the fantastic session we've had today, I just wanted to give you a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, to give us your elevator pitch of why it's Luisa for London. I think Luisa for London would have been a great catchphrase. So why is it Luisa for London in 2 minutes?
Yeah, I was very lucky with Luisa for London. It makes for a good hashtag with the alliteration. Well, why me? It's because I have a plan for the future. I recognise the changes that are happening in our city, the rise of online shopping, the shift to home working. These are irreversible changes, and we can't just pretend that they're not happening. We have to embrace the opportunities that are in front of us. And that's what I've developed a plan to do, to make all of our neighbourhoods across London attractive and affordable places to live and work. So this is why I've put jobs, homes and clean air at the heart of my campaign. These are 3 basic needs of Londoners. They're areas we're being let down on, but I think there's also a great opportunity to finally tackle them properly and provide Londoners with the affordable homes that they need, decent jobs and clean air at last. We need it. We need these things for the future. And actually, it's your futures that we're talking about here tonight. As a younger Londoner myself, I'm not going to claim to be as young as some of you here. I won't over egg it, but you know, it's not long ago that I was in my 20s, and I know what it's like to have gone through some of these things, having insecure work, difficult landlords to deal with, and also toxic air pollution affecting my own health. I've also fought for London's place at the heart of Europe, and I know how passionate young people feel about that as well. So if you vote for me as your mayor, I promise I will be a strong advocate for you and your futures, and always listen to you as well and what your priorities are. So please, if you like the sound of my plan, vote Liberal Democrat on all 3 ballot papers next Thursday.
Great, thank you, Louisa. I just wanted to share a few reflections. I think it was really great to hear, and quite refreshing to hear from a politician that is quite concise with the answers. I think you're an excellent speaker. You're straight to the point. You answer the questions without needing several follow-ups. So I think that was great, and I think you touched upon some really key issues. You touched upon obviously crime within London, hate crimes, gender issues, clean air, housing. I think we really covered the whole spectrum of your manifesto. Wow. and issues facing young people in London. So I really just wanted to thank you for that. This is kind of the awkward phase where I've just got to give a bit of a disclaimer. So Patchworkers is of course non-partisan. We don't support a party or align to a party. So I just wanted to make it clear to everyone on the call that there are 20 other candidates that they can find online and vote for. Of course, Luisa is one of them, and you've heard from Luisa today. But there's a link in the chat to the other candidates if you do want to check out the others. But just to round off, Luisa, it was fantastic having you. Thank you very much for your time. And I do appreciate the frankness and the straight to the pointness of the answers. And I think you are quite a forward-thinking leader. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Naeem, and to the Patchwork Foundation for all the work that you do, and all the young people that are here today. You've had some excellent and really engaging questions.